Hello, my name's Jon Bowen. This talk is about separation anxiety, what it is and why we treat it. So the first thing to talk about is the impact that separation problems can have on people and their pets. So about 1 in 6 dogs, we think, suffer from some kind of separation related problem. This isn't necessarily separation anxiety, but these dogs will show patterns of behaviour like destructiveness, or they'll bark or howl, or they'll urinate or defecate in the house. And these kinds of problems are probably the thing that has the biggest impact on dog owners and their lifestyle. So we end up with dogs that we constantly have to clean up after. So they've left mess on the floor, they've damaged things, they've urinated, defecated, so we're constantly cleaning up. Then we can't leave them on their own, so we can't go to the cinema, we can't maybe even go to work easily. We have to hire other people to look after the dog, and that dog may not even be happy with them, but at least the dog is not destroying things continuously. So we have to adapt our lifestyle a lot. And then we have to think about cost of repairs. So some of these dogs will damage walls, they'll damage furniture, they'll even damage electrical objects or phones and mobile phones and remote controls. So it can be a very, very costly process looking after these dogs. This separation anxiety problem, which is the more severe of these separation problems, can actually have an impact on the dog's long-term health as well. And it's particularly linked with an increased rate of skin problems. So not only does separation anxiety have a very profound impact on owners, and we know that it's the #1 behaviour problem in terms of affecting owner satisfaction and owner lifestyle, it also potentially has long-term consequences for the dog as well. So the first thing is, why do dogs get separation problems at all? And there are a number of different risk factors during puppyhood. The first is being reared in a barren and stressful kennel type environment like the one shown in the picture. So why would this cause a problem? Firstly, that this is the kind of environment that lacks the sorts of things that puppies need to explore, to generate interest in their environment and start to make them move away from their mother and become engaged in what's going on around them. So living in a very barren environment means that these puppies are not drawn to become weaned off spending all of their time around their mother and start to engage with things that are going on around them. The second thing is that these puppies are not exposed to all the normal day-to-day noises, activities, people, all the kind of things that a puppy would normally experience when they move into a domestic home. So when they move into their first home, it feels unfamiliar. There's nothing there that gives them a sense of security, because this is nothing like the kind of environment they were born into. The next thing is general lack of stimulation. So thinking not necessarily just during this initial period of a few weeks when the puppy is with the breeder, but also when they move into their new home. They need lots of stimulation and activities and things to do which redirect some of the destructive or problematic aspects of puppy behaviour into something which is healthy. So puppies will normally want to chew things, and they'll want to tear things up, and they want to search and find food. If we don't provide them with those opportunities, then they'll find some way of doing it for themselves, and that could mean damaging our sofa and tearing up the carpets and chewing the walls. Next thing is lack of social contact. This seems to be a particular risk factor after puppies have been homed. So after they've homed, we know that in some studies, puppies that are able to have a wide range of social contact with other dogs and lots of people, as long as they're not frightened of those things, actually are more resilient and less likely to develop separation-related anxiety. And this is probably because they form broad attachments to different people and different dogs, rather than a single attachment to 1 or 2 people that they live with. Then the next thing that we know is a risk factor is harsh training methods. So these are actually a risk factor for lots of problems, not just separation anxiety, but puppies that are trained using reinforcement-based methods, using food rewards, for example, are much more likely to develop into well-balanced, emotionally balanced, well-behaved pets. Those puppies that are exposed to punitive methods or a mixture of harsh punishment and reinforcement are more likely to develop anxiety problems, and that includes all the kind of things that we're talking about today. So we've said that 1 in 6 dogs have separation problems, but they're not all separation anxiety. So there are a number of other reasons why dogs do things that we don't want them to do when they're left on their own. The first is boredom and self-amusement. So lots of young dogs will just go through the cupboards, tear up the cushions, go through the dustbin, and this is just because they're having fun. And when you video them, they're having a fantastic time. And the reason why they do it when you're not there is because you've told them not to. So they're waiting for the moment you leave, and as soon as you leave, they go and do all the things you've told them not to do while you're there. So this is not a stressed dog, this is a dog having fun, and this reminds us that we need to give dogs things to direct these play and exploratory behaviours into, rather than allowing them to just come up with their own silly ideas. Then the next thing is stressors. So not all dogs that are anxious when they're left on their own are anxious because we're not there. Quite a large proportion are anxious because there are other things that they're frightened of. So it could be loud noises, which could be fireworks or gunfire or loud traffic noises or aircraft. So things which frighten them that are just noise related can make them more anxious when we're not there. And then when they need us to give them support, we're not around. So that means that they're anxious, not just because of this noise, but also because they don't have any social support. And then the other one is territorial behaviour. This isn't something we see in very young puppies, but as they go towards puberty, they become more territorial. They're more likely to bark at things that are going on outside. They may not be anxious at this point, but they can become a major nuisance for the neighbourhood. And also you'll get lots of complaints if your dog is staring out of the window all day barking at people going by. Then lack of house training. So lots of people will complain that their dog is eliminating in the household when they're not at home. And that may be because the dog has anxiety, but it's also possible the dog just hasn't been properly house trained. So maybe that dog isn't used to holding in urine and not going to the toilet for periods of 3 or 4 hours, because when you're there, you let the dog out. And when you're not there, it has no concept of the fact that this is not an appropriate thing to do inside. So sometimes what gets diagnosed as separation anxiety are just dogs that don't have very good house training. And then the last one is excessive attachment to the owners. And this is typically something that starts when puppies are very young. So the first few nights they have difficulty sleeping away from, obviously they don't have their mum or the other puppies. They can't sleep comfortably away from these new owners that they've moved into the home with. And it starts with crying and whining at night, and then gradually progresses on to not being able to be left during the day. And we gradually find that the dogs develop more and more separation related problems. So what kind of things do dogs do? Well, the pattern of behaviour that we see when dogs are left on their own actually gives us an idea of what kind of separation problem we're dealing with. Is it separation anxiety or one of these other problems, having fun, being disturbed by things going on outside, those other kind of problems we talked about? So if we look at destructiveness, very often dogs will destroy things that are personal possessions. And that's because they're drawn to them because they have our odour on them. We've handled them recently, we've worn them recently, so it could be shoes, a remote control, a mobile phone, clothing. So these are things that have a human odour on, and dogs are attracted to those because it reminds the dog of us. One of the things that dogs do to pacify themselves and feel relaxed is to chew. So it makes logical sense that if you feel lonely and a little bit stressed and you want to chew something, then chewing something that has an odour of familiarity on it makes you feel more comfortable. Not that your owner is going to be very happy. Then furniture. So the kinds of things that dogs will do is chew the legs of furniture and also rip out the foam and the filling from sofas and stuff like that. This is a little bit of a bleak story in that what puppies are doing there is they're rehearsing the behaviour that they would normally use in the wild when they're dealing with prey that they've caught. So biting legs and removing skin and things like that. So a leather sofa to a 5-6 month old puppy is quite similar to the kind of prey that they would catch in the wild. So they're practicing some of those behaviours. And obviously if you can redirect that onto other things they can chew up and tear apart, that's much better. But if you don't, then they're going to find things like your furniture very, very attractive. And then the last thing is trying to escape. So if you see a lot of the chewing is around doorways or around window frames, where the dog is trying to escape from the house or escape from a particular part of the house, then that's an indication this might be a dog who's trying to follow you or trying to escape from something that it's stressed by. Then barking or howling. A lot of barking is at external noises, can be a reply to another dog who's barking in the neighbourhood. It could be a reaction to people walking past or other dogs in the street. And then we get howling and whining. And these two things are different. If we videotape dogs and we see that they are vocalising a lot, but it's almost always in reaction to something external, that could be just territorial behaviour or just a reaction to things happening around the home. If we see the dog is wandering around the house, not paying attention to what's going on outside, but howling and whining, that could be more of an indication of an attachment problem. Then with urination and defecation, if we've got a dog who's maybe just not very well house trained, then what we typically see is that they'll urinate close to an exit point that they would normally use to go into the garden, for example. So they're trying their best. They can see outside, they're trying to get outside, and they're urinating somewhere which is as close as they can make it to the place that we want them to go to the toilet. If, on the other hand, we see urine in lots of different places around the room, maybe in different rooms, that's more likely to be a dog who's very anxious, who's running around, who can't really settle, can't think clearly, and is urinating little spots all over the place. So when we video those dogs, we'll often find that they're wandering and pacing and agitated and whining and howling as well. And this urinating or defecating in lots of places is because the dog is very confused and doesn't know what to do. So if we see damage to personal possessions, urination or defecation in lots of places, howling and whining as opposed to barking at external events, and attempts to escape, those are all things that are more likely to be indicators of separation anxiety if we also see certain other signs as well. So typically dogs with separation anxiety want to stay very close to their owners a lot of the time. They show distress for any period that they're kept apart from their owners. So for example, if the owner goes to the bathroom, then these are dogs that will claw at the door and whine because they feel uncomfortable about that. They'll be very often attention seeking and demanding of attention when the owners are around, and they may become very unsettled when you have guests because that guest is a competitor for the dog's attention. So these are all kind of signs that you might see in combination with those more severe ones that could be indications of separation anxiety. And separation anxiety itself is more likely to be seen in younger dogs. These are dogs that have formed an excessive dependent bond on their owners, and they can't cope when we're not around. You can see separation anxiety problems developing in very old dogs, and this is usually because they're suffering from a condition called canine cognitive dysfunction. So this is a little bit like senility in human beings. These are dogs that find it more and more progressively difficult to deal with being alone and living alongside all the noises and things that were going on in their environment they were used to when they were younger. And so sometimes we see those older dogs showing separation anxiety signs, but almost always this is a problem of young dogs rather than older dogs. So to conclude, many dogs have separation problems. The most serious of these is separation anxiety, and although it's a serious problem, it is something that can be treated. So there are behavioural therapy approaches, and there are also medications that can be used to help these dogs, and they're very effective. But this is a condition which probably requires a degree of specialist help. So it's the kind of problem where if you see these things, you should probably contact your veterinarian for help. So thanks for listening.